Hi. Before we get started on chapter 24 today, I would like to share something with you. In the days before air conditioning was prevalent, in churches and in other public institutions where a lot of people would be sitting, you would find these things. And on the back, you would see the name, usually of a funeral home that donated them. These were fans. And this is the way we kept cool in the summer. So I wanted to show you that. We're going to read from A Day of Rest by Edna Creekmore Carman, chapter 24. Other than one long, drawn-out yell, Mr. Waters made no sound. But the sheriff did not believe Mr. Waters was hurt. He would have fallen on the hay in the shed. However, Douglas and Mr. Lewis ran to the shed to check on the deputy. The sheriff gave no thought to Mr. Waters or the other two men as he pulled his undershirt off and gave it a good shake. The sheriff was getting his shoes on when Doug and Mr. Lewis led Mr. Waters out of the shed. What did draw the attention of the sheriff was the fact that Doug was talking very seriously with the agents. Pitching hay is one of those dirty jobs that I always hate. I'd have to be pretty sure of what I was going to find before I pitched old hay for someone else. Now, if I were doing your job, I wouldn't go around searching willy-nilly. I'd find out first who's selling the stuff. Oh, you would you? Mr. Waters said bitterly. Yes, I would, Douglas agreed calmly. That way I would have to search only one place. That's a good idea, Mr. Lewis agreed, looking speculatively at Douglas. If only one knew who was buying the stuff, we might find out who sells it. I don't buy the stuff myself, Douglas began. I bet you don't, muttered Mr. Waters. Ignoring the interruption, Douglas continued evenly. But I have heard that there is a house down in the valley where the Willow Creek Road meets the old logging road, where you can get a swig. You can even get it delivered to your house in a wagon if you order some cordwood. It's a wild goose chase, Mr. Waters said bitterly, looking at his superior for agreement. Maybe, Mr. Lewis agreed as he studied Douglas for future signs of trickery. This is too much, the sheriff thought. I am not going to participate in another joke tonight. But his attention was caught. He recognized the house Doug was describing. If Doug was intending that for a joke, it was liable to backfire. The sheriff had heard rumors about the two Bartons that were visiting at that house. He had even sent an inquiry to Hazard to check up on them. Now here was Doug, of all people, making what amounted to an official tip. It would have to be acted on, but not at this time of night. He would wait until morning. The sheriff walked over to the group so that he might see Doug's face. Doug turned and looked the sheriff directly in the eyes. The sheriff was shocked. Gone was the twinkle that had been there earlier. Doug was serious. The sheriff drew back into the shadows until only the bare outline of his face could be seen in the flickering lantern light. What was going on? The sensible explanation would be that this would be another trick in which he was to be an active participant. But would Doug be so dead serious about it? Was Doug still trying to punish the feds? Floyd didn't mind the feds being punished for their interference in his county, but he felt that Mr. Waters had been punished enough with all that hay in his suit. The trouble with Doug punishing the feds was that he, Floyd McTay, would be punished along with them. I suppose you suggest that we get a warrant and go down there right now, Mr. Waters commented sarcastically. Why, yes, officer, Doug returned seriously. You never know what the morning might bring. It's better to grab the chance as it comes. The sheriff moved up to the group and looked at his cousin doubtfully. One thing he could be sure of was that Doug was not giving the information to help the federal government. Turning pious, Doug? The sheriff asked skeptically. Doug returned the sheriff's gaze solemnly, eye to eye. Suddenly, Doug's eyes began to glitter with mischief. The sheriff relaxed. The mischief was normal. He's pulling my leg, the sheriff thought as he shook his head, but we will have to check it out. But the nagging doubt remained. There was something more to it than just mischief. If he as sheriff had heard about the Bartons, then Doug down there at the store should have heard about them also. But why would he turn them in to revenue agents? No mountaineer would help a federal officer unless he had an axe of his own to grind. Could that axe be part of the other strange events of the evening? Are you suggesting that we get that warrant immediately and go down there tonight? The sheriff asked bitterly. That's up to you, officers, Doug replied smoothly. I prefer visiting people in the daytime myself, but then I don't have to worry about someone tipping them off so they can leave or hide the evidence I was looking for. But it's late. I know, Doug said sympathetically, but for you that's exactly what I would suggest. If I were you, I wouldn't waste my time checking the house, though. But go straight to the barn and check it, especially a wagon covered with old quilts holding a load of wood. The sheriff studied Doug closely. Those directions were very specific, not the vague generalizations that were usually given by an informant. Something was back of Doug's tip. Doug was not only telling them the house, but was also suggesting places to look. The sheriff shook his head. There was no way of getting out of it. He would have to act on the tip. That would mean no sleep tonight. A trip to the county seat to rouse up the judge to get the warrant. Then a trip to Lower Willow Creek about midnight. He gave his cousin a glare, which was returned by a smile. Are you gentlemen ready to go? Doug asked politely of his visitors. As the federal officers turned toward the gate to follow the path to the house, the sheriff walked over to Doug and asked him if he knew that Rob Barton had taken the bus to Hazard that afternoon. Douglas stopped and stared off into the distance. He needn't have told the officers anything. Rob had gone to Hazard for his dad. Walter would have taken care of the problem without the officers being involved. But Walter and Rob wouldn't get back from Hazard until late Monday or sometime Tuesday. That left Mrs. Barton alone with those drunken thugs for at least a day, and maybe more. Be sure to check the entire shed, especially a pile of hay at the far end, he said abruptly as he opened the barn gate. And that's the end of chapter 24.